everyone, it's Hailey, and today I wanted to talk about 10 books to read this spring. Spring is honestly one of my favorite seasons. Fall is definitely my absolute favorite, but I also love spring because I love just sitting outside and having the weather be like not too hot, not too cold. The only sad thing about spring is the rain, but it's still like we do get some sunny days, and it's just so nice to be able to like go for a walk again after staying inside all winter and dealing with the cold and the snow. It is like just, I feel reborn, which is why I have a list of books here that, one, they just make me think of like spring is hard for me because I feel like with winter and fall and summer I have more of a clear picture of what I like to read, but with spring it's kind of all mumble jumbled. So I like emotional contemporaries. I like stories that kind of deal with growth and rebirth and that sort of thing, but I also, you know, there's some here that just deal with flowers and just feel like spring reads to me. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first book that I wanted to talk about today is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is such an incredible story. It deals with a main character who, definitely trigger warning for suicide, but her mother has recently died by suicide and she's trying to deal with that loss and cope with the grief that she's experiencing and come to terms with it and acceptance. Now, she also believes that her mother has turned into a bird and that her mother is telling her to travel to Taiwan to meet her grandparents who she's never actually met before. So she ends up going to Taiwan and learning more about her heritage and her culture and the family that she never got to know. So it's definitely a very emotional story where you are dealing with so much alongside the main character, but it's also a story that is steeped in this rich, beautiful culture, and it's one of my favorite representations of mental illness personally. I feel like it deals with it incredibly well and accurately, and it just absolutely has my heart. Like, I totally recommend this book for everyone. It is one that is going to make you cry and it will make you feel a lot of things, but it's one you will feel like you have gained so much for having read it, which I think is really important. It has like the magical element to it as well. Like, I love books that have a little touch of that. They're contemporary but also have a little bit of magic in it, and in this one it's a cultural magic that is very interesting and fascinating and adds so much color to the story, honestly. So I would totally recommend this one if you are looking for an intense and an emotional read. It is a great one. Next up is Among the Beasts and Briars by Ashley Poston. So this is actually a fantasy story, and this is one where it deals with flowers and the natural world a lot, which is why I feel like it is a great one for spring. So you are actually following the royal gardener's daughter and the only person who is able to like go into these woods and try and save everyone else after there's this terrible event that happens. So the story is set pretty much entirely in the woods. You have animals that are really prevalent to it. There's a fox that is really prevalent to it, a bear that's really prevalent to it, and I felt like that was a really interesting element. It is totally like, it reads like a modern fairy tale almost. It definitely is very fairy tale-esque, and it deals with the natural world so prevalently that I feel like if you're going to read any fantasy in spring, this is the perfect one to go with. Next up, if we are going to talk about a book that's like about rebirth and finding yourself, really, I feel like it would be remiss to not mention The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This is a story that is told in verse, and it is so amazing. Like, these poems are beautiful, and you follow the same character, Michael. He is a young gay boy who you follow him from like a super young age all the way until university, as it's almost like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Like, he's trying to find where he fits in, and you just, oh, I couldn't help but like fall in love with him. He is such a sweet and pure character, and you want what's best for him as he is facing so many different things and trying to figure out what his identity is and where he belongs. And there are so many facets to his identity that he's exploring and trying to understand as a mixed race gay teen. He is just trying to see where he can fit in and feel comfortable. And it is such a lovely drag queen origin story, really, which is why it is a great story about rebirth and birth in general, because you see him just blossom this entire time. It is like the best I feel like character growth that I have read. It is so great, and oh my goodness, I totally fell in love with this. Like, it had my heart from the very beginning, and I loved seeing him finally come to where he felt like he belonged, and it was so satisfying, and I just really loved his character. Next up is A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow by Laura Taylor Namey. This is actually a pretty recent read for me, but you follow the main character who ends up going to England because her abuela has died, she has lost her best friend, and she also has lost her boyfriend. So she's dealing with a lot of loss and a lot of feelings, and her mental health hasn't been really great. So her family ends up sending her to England to live with a family member to try and like reset and come to happiness again. Now you see her have a lot of character growth as well, and find a new place where she feels like she belongs, and realize that she can go on with life after loss. So this is definitely more in the range of like an emotional contemporary, which is why I think it's great for spring, but it's set in Winchester, England, and I also feel like England and like England summer to me feels like spring, like the dreariness of it kind of. It definitely felt like a spring read to me for that reason. I also think the cover kind of contributes to that, to be honest, because like it's just so pink and bright and vibrant, but it's a really beautiful love story, but it's also a story about the character like learning to deal with loss and learning to move beyond that and to accept change, really. So super enjoyed this one and think it's a great one for this time of year. Next up is another book that actually deals with flowers, and that is Maybe This Time by Kasie West. So this is actually set in the summer, but you are following the main character who is a florist. So she's the daughter of a florist, but you're following her and then the son of a caterer throughout all of these different events through this whole summer. So it's not just weddings, it's like weddings, funerals, like just different, actually it's not even just the summer, it's a whole year. I totally forgot about that. It's 1 year and 9 events and 9 chances to fall in love. There's another book that is kind of similar, and that one is just set during the summer though. But this was really interesting because there's little things added about the flowers. Like with each event, there's a different flower, and you get like a little, like this first one, Valentine's Day, and it's tulips, and then you get like why the tulips are related to that holiday or event or whatever. So really interesting additions to it, but flowers are super prevalent to the story as well. And it's also just like a really cute and interesting love story that also has a lot of growth for the characters in addition to the flowers. Next up is Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. So I feel like this is a good one for spring because it is a story about second chances. Like over and over and over again, you have the main character having the chance to try and save his girlfriend. He falls in love with her, but then she ends up dying, and he ends up falling, and every time like he keeps on going back through this loop basically. So he's trying to change the event so she won't die and he can save her. So really definitely a story about rebirth in that way and like change, and it's definitely an emotional contemporary as well. A really interesting contemporary with a twist. Fell in love with the characters. They're so vibrant, and it was a very unique story as well, which made me just love it. Like the romance between them was so cute, and it really tugged on my heartstrings, honestly. Speaking of tugging on heartstrings, next up is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this is the latest book by this author. I can't wait for her to come out with more though, because I've loved everything by her. So she also has The Poet X and then With the Fire on High. This book is actually a novel in verse, which so is The Poet X. With the Fire on High, that one is in prose. But this is the story of two characters who find out that they're sisters after the death of their father. So their father dies in a plane crash, and one of the sisters is living in New York City, the other is living in the Dominican Republic, and they find out that they're related. Like they didn't even know of each other's existence until he dies. So obviously there's a lot of emotion and grief with that loss, but also like learning that you have a sister and dealing with that. And there's just so many layers to this story that are in like such such few words to tell such a poignant and powerful story, and she does an amazing job of it. Honestly, you want a book that is going to like absolutely destroy you, definitely read this one. Next up is This Time Will Be Different by Misa Sugiura. So this is another book that deals with flowers and a florist. So it's really interesting because you're following this main character who her family has had this flower shop. I was torn if I was going to say florist or flower shop, but they've had this flower shop for generations and they are worried about losing it. They might lose it soon, and this conflict that is happening that might have them lose the flower shop goes all the way back to when the Japanese Americans were placed into incarceration camps. So this is dealing with racism and that terrible history that isn't spoken about enough, but you also see how much this flower shop means to the family. This is another book where flowers are like super prevalent in it. You get to know all about the different kinds of flowers and everything and how important they are to the main character's family. It's a layered story that I just fell in love with it. Like, I really enjoyed that it dealt with history, but also in a modern day setting. You're seeing the effects of that history now and how it is still so prevalent, but there's also like some different elements to the story with the flowers and with the main characters. So just a really great read for any time of year, but spring is also a great time to read it. Next up is The Loose Ends List by Carrie Firestone. So this is a really unique read because it is set on a cruise ship. It definitely is an emotional contemporary, but it's set on a cruise ship where you follow the main character going on this cruise with her grandmother. And this cruise, the purpose of it is that her grandmother is going to die on the cruise. So it is actually a cruise where she gets to choose like to end her own life because she's sick and she's dying, and this is her getting to do that on her own terms. So really, really different in that way. I loved the family aspect and how prevalent that was to the story. It definitely is like a really emotional one. I wasn't a fan of the romance, but like that's just an aside there. That isn't the most prevalent part of the story. It's mostly that family relationship and loss and moving past that, but it's also like this fun and interesting trip because there's that twist to it. So really a unique read for sure. And finally is Love is a Revolution by Renee Watson. This is really a story that deals with self-love. So you follow the main character who she just falls in love with the MC at her cousin's poetry night, and they are part of this activism group, and she's never really been into that, but she pretends that she is, so then they can have this connection, and she's just a completely fake person when she's with him. She pretends to be someone that she's not, so then she kind of starts losing track of who she really is, and it ultimately is a story about her finding out who she is and falling in love with herself and owning who she is as a person. So I love how prevalent that message was. I think it's something that really anyone could benefit from as she is going through and learning that loving herself is the real revolution. So such a beautiful story. Sorry, Charlie just yawned, but it is such a beautiful story in that way, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, so those are all the books that I wanted to recommend for you to read this spring. So I hope that helps you out with your spring reading list. But if you have read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts on them or what book you would recommend to read this spring, because I would love to hear your recommendations. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one soon. Bye!